It is. I feel better and I'm going to stay feeling better. That's just it. And that's just how it's got to be. But isn't it funny though? It's just really weird. Like finally when things started coming together with being balanced, and all of a sudden you start talking about, your experience, your new discoveries. And then a client before that, before you told me anything, John, the Purple Heart Army guy, I'm sure you know him. He's such a sweetheart. Love him to bits. And he showed me what he was doing as far as the Treasury, getting a check from the Treasury, and he was able to pay the bills. I go, oh my God, are you serious? Wow, what a miracle. Like, oh my God, like all this amazing, great things have happened. And I'm like, whoa. And then and a few days after him, then you write me and you tell me what's going on with you. And I'm like, what? Okay, cool. So anyway, David, I'm so glad you're on. It's been a while since we've had a show together, but I'm really grateful that you're back. And and I've told my listeners that you really have a big heart, and you have a passion for what you're doing. It's not because, oh, I got to do this because I got to get money out, and all the shit. You come from a very authentic background because of the shit that you had to go through in high school. And that really woke you up, and then it sent you to another place, and it made you wake up even more. And it was through experiences. It was not something that was handed to you on a silver platter. You had to work your ass off for it. And that's the beauty of what I see in you compared to anybody else I've ever worked with, to tell you the truth. I'm not just telling you to feed your brain. I have dealt with some real shady assholes, and I got so sick and tired of it. And I was like, you know what? I need to take a break. Not only my mood problem, but it was more of that anxiety and just like, what the fuck, and I'm sure you understand being involved in this type of work. It's not very easy when you come across really authentic people. So, but I'm really grateful I met you, that we started talking. And also I wanted to say, a lot of my students have come to me saying, oh gosh, David has helped me so much. They have never said one bad thing about you. And I will say that because there was a guy named Ken that I was helping my students with credit problems, like on the public side, credit repair, whatever. And I thought he was a good guy. And I just got nothing but bad things coming back. Like, this guy did this to me. He stole $400,000 from me and my group, all this horrible shit. And one lady, her husband had a heart attack and he died. I mean, come on. So that's when I had to draw the line. I say, this guy, I don't know what's wrong with him. Before, he was really cool. And he was like this guy to help everyone with their credit problems. And he just really took advantage. And I thought, holy shit, there's some real fucking vultures out there, man. And that's when I said, no, I need to take a break and just start getting on my little YouTube thing and start, creating my little chilling folklores thing and just kind of put my mind at ease for a while. Because I was like, man, I got to take a break here. But I have not gotten not one student that has told me anything negative about you, saying David's doing this to me, he did that, nothing. So I will say that. And that's why I'm like, wow, you know what? That says a lot. So anyway, go ahead and talk about your new discoveries, or no, actually a background about yourself and your new discoveries.
Yes. So my introduction to this movement began around 2012, around a group of grown-ups who thought it would somehow be a good idea for them to place me into public school in the vicinity of some very hostile county school employees in Gwinnett County with its public schools. And upon my presence there, and the fact that I had a head of my own, the involved staff members from Brookwood High School proceeded to commit acts of genocide against me through the operation of a foreign government's equipment. And in furtherance of these acts of genocide, they fabricated a prognosis based off of their beliefs regarding diagnosed persons and sought to provide additional fabrications of that diagnosis over to the involved entities that were used as weapons against me, because they believed that that would make those weapons operate against me. And they believe that kind of treatment is perfectly acceptable, even on a large scale. And at the time when 15-year-old me was going through this, I had obviously the mental capacity of a 15-year-old. So explaining the severity of the genocidal acts was very difficult, especially for the adult environment.
Yes, and I totally understand exactly where you're coming from. I mean, I'm studying clinical psychology and all that stuff because I'm learning about my own shit that I know about. But I totally understand, though, that they actually use these fabricated diagnosis to, to justify their treatment upon the youth.
Yes.
And I'm very aware of that. And now my question to you really quick before we go any further. When you mention genocide, are you talking specifically about euthanization of some sort?
I would refer to acts of custodial kidnapping. I would say that accurately represents the treatment towards me specifically. I would also, I would say that happens on a discriminatory basis where there is an entire marginalized class of people defined on the basis of a diagnosis, coupled with extreme and outrageous acts such as kidnapping, custodial assertions, and the use of various weapons such as a county court system and a segregated school system in furtherance of that genocide. If you want,
so moving into further, they could have gotten even further with you and done maybe some type of laboratory experiments, you think?
Definitely probably had that sort of thing going through their head when they were making the fraudulent assessments of the actual value of my life, and they were repeating that to my biological parents. These are school staff, but they are behaving in a manner, and it may sound controversial that I'm going to say this, very similar to the way the Israeli government is presently treating the civilian Palestinian populations over in the city Rafah overseas.
Oh, my goodness. Yes. I've heard about the stories. It is absolutely horrific what they've done to the people. I agree.
There's this entire marginalized class. I think Hitler's term for it was, quote, Untermenschen, unquote, who are defined and then targeted by acts of genocide for the purpose of committing extremist terrorism, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and a whole bunch of horrific, by nature damaging forms of conduct and treatment towards anyone, nonetheless a 15-year-old.
Yeah, goodness, you were just a child.
Yes, and it was happening under the premise of school staff. So it's people who are representing themselves as, quote, help, unquote, to the parents, when in reality, nothing they're doing is help and is in fact the creation of a conflict of interest with the student directly.
And how did your parents take this during this time?
So back then, 15-year-old me was very awake. I'm presently today very awake. It's probably something that could be inferred. But when I tried to explain that there was something fundamentally wrong with the organizations that housed these weapons, the segregated school, the courts, and I tried to explain there was something fundamentally wrong with those to my biological parents, they didn't really comprehend the magnitude and severity of that wrongfulness. I feel like in an environment like that, the expectation of, I guess, and I hesitate to use this language, I'm not throwing my biological parents under the bus, but I'd say in the instance of competent parents, there's a bit of an expectation that they will protect their children and recognize dangers created to them by certain environments. But that was not happening. Any sort of like interference with what the school was doing and how they were attempting to place me into the segregated environments and emotionally abuse me outside of any sort of priority that I successfully graduate. So my parents did not really take what I would consider the necessary preventative action so that that course of genocide conduct would not continue to go forward as it later did. And as we'll
you know what, David, it's interesting that you're bringing this up because I went through a lot of hell as a child in school. My mother, she was always fighting with the teachers. That's all I ever heard about her. And they would say, oh, well, you know, one part of her brain, and I was only 5 years old, one part of her brain works and the other part doesn't. Like there's something wrong with her. You know, and what it was just when the teacher would start telling stories, I just get up and just start doing my own shit. I didn't care, you know. And then it got to a point on my first first grade. I was only 6 years old, and I'll just bring my part a little briefly, not too much, okay? But I'm just saying that I understand exactly what you're going through, and I finally learned to read. I went to a school called Penny Camp in Manhattan Beach. It's a really, Manhattan Beach is a very richy place because my parents were upper middle class, not upper class, but upper middle class. But it was still a public school. So I went, and one day in the cafeteria, the teacher said, hey, you know what? Eat your coleslaw. And I fucking hate that shit. So she took a fork and she pushed it down my throat. And then I started crying, and she pulled my hair and she started smacking my head all over the place. I was only, how old was I? I was only like 6 years old.
It's crazy. What year was this?
This was, I don't know what shit, I'm older than you are. So I'm like 49 now, but this is back in the 80s.
Back in the 80s.
And I told my mom, I was only 6 years old. I told my mom, of course, I couldn't help but tell my mom. I was fucking crying. I got off the bus, and now like when I see the bus in school, I used to be traumatized. So I told my mom, like, oh, the teacher hit me, she beat me, she smacked my head around in front of the teachers, in front of everybody in the cafeteria. And then my mom went to town. She went to the principals. I don't know what happened, but she freaking went off on those bitches. But I'm like, I don't know if she sued them. She should have. But she came back, and then after that, I never went back to that school again. I went to another school. But at least one thing I can say, my mother was there. I mean, she had her own little mood problems herself. She was not an easy woman to live with. But when it came down to, hey, if you're hurting my child, and if she comes back like this, I'm gonna fucking do something about it. So when I went to high school, I went like maybe 1 year of high school, and then after that, homeschool the rest of the time. Because she knew that they were crooked bastards. And this was after LA, Manhattan Beach is LA, California, and then going into Riverside County. She knew they were a bunch of idiots. And she took me out, and there was a woman who was like my nana or a maid. She was French. She was a French Jew lady, and her parents were murdered in the Gestapo. Okay. She told my mom when my mom was having problems with all these freaking people, but she was more of a good friend of ours, not just a maid. She was a good friend. She was there to help with household stuff. And she says, you know what? The problem with these schools, your daughter is too smart for them. That's the fucking problem. They're a bunch of idiots. And she had a vendetta against the whole system. She was kind of a woman's lib lady, but she went through hell. Both her parents were taken away from her, and she had to be hidden in a nun convent. At 5 years old, she never saw her parents again, and she didn't see her siblings 30 years later. So she became a good friend of my mom's, and she kind of talked some sense into my mother and said, you know what, don't put up with this shit. So, I mean, I'm grateful for her. I haven't, she was an older lady, but I can understand exactly what you're going through, that the system, we think, and I'm not saying all teachers are like that. I have a student that's a teacher. She's a sweetheart, is so sweet. Not all teachers are like that. Not all school systems are like that. But unfortunately, there are majority, I would say 90% of them are fucked up. So I agree with everything you're saying. I've been there too. Just wanted to let you know that. Are you there, David?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, I wanted to bring that up. So just to let everyone know that school is not always that great. You know, a lot of us have stories, and especially when you're a minor and you're getting beaten up by a teacher. You know, I was abused, literally beaten the fuck up. Okay. And they could do it with words, they could do it with physicality. So I totally understand and believe exactly where you're coming from. So you can go right ahead.
Yes. So the treatment was egregious. One of the things I said this recently with one of my counselors that I go see, like private counseling, is that health issues, when they are raised to these kinds of foreign agents, such as those who are employed by the schools and by the courts, they have a tendency of disregarding the health issue. Like there was one particular incident where I had been complaining to the staff of the high school in question about flu symptoms and feeling sick. And knowing full well that I was complaining about those symptoms and probably presenting them, they refused to allow me to go to the school clinic and basically tried to force me to stay there sick. And then later, when I actually got to see a regular doctor and he tested me, I tested positive for the flu. So they start putting together this weird set of emails to my parents, trying to quote unquote mitigate the situation. Oh, where's David? We miss him, because I essentially had missed an entire week of school at that point. But every little thing that they were doing was an effort to keep me in that placement in furtherance of the fabricated prognosis that they had come up with about me, just based on their own inability to make anything productive out of the situation or make anything positive or reflect my actual value out of the situation. So that's part of the genocide, or even the malicious elements of this. It's considered like malicious prosecution is what we're litigating about now with regards to events. But
Right.
this adverse prognosis exhibited by particularly one teacher, was actually a couple of them who were in cahoots from the school. It grew worse and worse and more retaliatory and more retaliatory as I raised issues about it at the school. And eventually this came to the point where the staff members involved not only school departments, but also a separate department of the school who had an affiliation with the magistrate court for Gwinnett County. So they were trying to use essentially like warrant applications as quote unquote disciplinary measures with a student. Obviously, as you can tell, I'm an adversarial creature. So I would characterize what was happening at the school as downright fighting, especially just in the absence of what I think would have been an appropriate parental response of, at the very least, intervention, and honestly, probably a lot of profanity similar to what your own mother exhibited when there was like any sort of like teacher issue at school. And it
Oh God.
could have been dealt with at that level, but the staff chose to escalate it. So fast forward to around 2013, which would have been on the normal timetable, my junior year, 11th grade year in high school, I started manifesting what we later believe and now believe was like a major depression picture as a result of all of these like aggravating factors that had developed from a very serious set of like genocide acts being taken against me and the lack of a proper remedy being implemented, specifically from like parents and those who would be in a parental role in my life at that point. And it was around the mornings of 2014, specifically during that summer, that I started having this experience in the depression, like waking up every morning and getting hit in the head by a taser, is how I would explain it. When I had eventually involved like lawyers with what was going on at the courts. One of them said they have an experience of like when they were in law school, like the law running through their head, but when he'd read the Bible, that would stop. It was probably a manifestation of that. But my belief today is that this experience of waking up in the morning, like getting hit in the head by something, now it's like the only thing that can be concentrated on, is that was the Unum Sanctum Trust, or the DTCC's lien and security interest on the body, is what my belief as to those incidents from the mornings of around 2014, as to what that actually was, and as to why this seems to be such a persistent issue that just wouldn't fix itself on its own. And
Right.
there were so many peculiarities about this conflict to me that I thought were peculiar. The most notably were the response from my biological parents, which I hate to say this, in terms of what we're going to call like brainwashing that is created through attending public school and seeing that it's a good idea, especially for children. I feel like they are heavily under the influence of that force of the trust.
Oh, it's very heavy. It's heavy in the country. You know, they believe that they have to go to school in order to get good grades, in order to go to college and all this other bullshit. So yeah, so this was an issue with the trust, you were saying.
Yes, I believe what was happening was I was waking up in the morning and the lien interest or security interest held by the DTCC in the school, and that was kind of influencing the behavior of the biological parents, who their response to me was kind of brainwashed and or on the will of the school, was I'm thinking that was the security interest of the DTCC. I realized there is an entity problem here. There's this foreign entity that keeps trying to bug me and find me and make its own malicious or false representations about alleged wrongfulness of me and alleged worthlessness of me that I know are not true, and I know are a fabrication of these creatures working for the Gwinnett Public Schools, who are operating under public control. I think I dropped names during one of the calls. I don't think it's necessary for me to drop their exact names. It was the principal and a couple other staff members, and also one of the school resource officers from Brookwood High School at Georgia, who were involved in this particular set of incidents and prognosis and conduct towards me. So I mentioned at one point that in their genocide effort, because the prognosis here is they believe that any diagnosed student is indefinitely going to remain in the custody of the state, and that's the only life they can have, and that any sort of issue that creates for them was an issue they were going to have anyway, which I think is a whole load of BS. Were doing everything in their power to try to impose those circumstances upon me.
Right.
And eventually they involved the courts in that attempted genocide. Now, by the time we get to 2014, I'm exhibiting like major depression pictures, and that is creating at-home issues where, even though it's parents with background in healthcare, they believe it's like under the public trust's influence, and that's their definition of health science. So when I show signs that are kind of outside of that box, they don't know what to do with it. The only thing that's going on in their head, sick person, when what it really is a picture of major depression. And
right. I mean, you know what? I mean, it's a very serious criteria to diagnose someone with major depression or any type of mental illness. And even if the student did have, I'm sorry,
right.
Even if the student did have a mental illness, let's say for real, not bullshit, okay, or even make believe too. Why would they abuse somebody who does have a criteria of either or? Why would they abuse and treat them so bad? You know, they should have more of an understanding, like, wow, okay, something's going on, you know. And it sounds very familiar with an ex-husband that did the same shit to me.
Right. It's
yeah.
it's a narcissistic abuse cycle is what it is, in the form
Yeah, or
of
psychopathic. Well, I don't know. I would say.
it
Yeah.
is. And it comes from this adverse prognosis or presumed prognosis to the life outcome of diagnosed persons. But when I did not fit that box, the involved school staff members retaliated against me. And that produced later issues of major depression, which were not there before that
Right.
interaction. But when they did show up, I was treated even worse because I was outside of the box that everyone under this theory of public control and the public trust recognizes as a valid health issue. So it essentially escalated the level of discriminatory attempts at me. And then as the conflict escalates, it essentially eventually reaches the courts, which are being used as a weapon against me. And it was numerous attempts to use the courts. There's a whole corruption issue, which happened internally at the school, that there's now actually like a federal civil rights lawsuit against the Gwinnett schools for, and it's about this. And that happens later, but before, while this is happening, when they're trying to involve the courts, eventually this gets to the point where they are essentially trying to implement an abandoned computer theory of incarceration against me that involves an abuse of the warrant application office at the magistrate courthouse in Gwinnett County, where one of the staff members basically went to the warrants application room. He flipped a warrant switch to say on. I was basically taken into custody and held indefinitely under an abandoned computer theory of incarceration for like the end of 2016 to around February 2021. However, by that point, I realized there was something fundamentally wrong. One, with the situation, two, that my life was in danger, and three, with the organization that was being used as this genocidal weapon against me.
Right.
And that eventually, around 2015 and some more in 2016, led me to your YouTube channel with the birth certificate as a bond video. We consider one of the quintessential videos on this subject, where like things started getting defined that were actually recognizable in the structure that was being used as a weapon against me. So I started just getting the sense like this is the exact same kind of situation that I'm seeing here. I need to study up on this and find all the knowledge available to me on this.
Right. And it like lit up like a Christmas tree for you, right?
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Where it's like, this is, I eventually met some very interesting people inside the facilities. One of the individuals I met was a Moor. And he actually explains the Moorish science to me, and it made perfect sense because it explains all of the fraudulent legal theories that were relied on by these county agents as the basis for their claim that they had jurisdiction to hold me indefinitely in their custody when they did not have actual jurisdiction. Probably as a matter of common sense, given that there's no evidence of any benefits to going along with their abandoned computer theory of incarceration that does not serve me in any way to acquiesce to that.
Yeah. And I just wanted to say real quick, because first of all, they were trying to diagnose you as major depression, right?
Well, actually, no, they weren't. I later presented that issue. They were trying to diagnose me with something else. It's a I hesitate to even say on recorded.
Okay, no problem.
But it's similar to ADHD, but there's a different word for it, which is no longer even recognized in the DSM, is what I will say.
Oh, okay.
But they were trying to use that, something that later got dropped from the DSM, because they thought whenever they would use that, it would provoke this unum sanctum trust weapon as getting used against me in their genocidal attempts.
Yeah, because if they were to diagnose you with some type of mental disorder, say bipolar depression, manic depression, whatever, okay, just say whatever. There should be no reason for you to go to prison or any mental diagnosis, unless you actually committed a freaking crime, like you butchered up some people and killed them or some crazy shit like that, right?
Right. That's the great part about it.
Yeah, and you would be like, you know what? Wait a second. This person is ill. They need to be on good medicine. They need to go get some treatment from a psychiatrist. This has nothing to do with going to prison or jail or whatever the hell. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm saying. What they did was absolutely flawed in the beginning.
It was.
So,
And it was part of the narcissistic abuse because they're essentially trying to inflict emotional injury on me. And then when I claim injury, they're trying to say, oh, that's a basis for this sort of placement. And it comes from like the theory of like operating segregated schools for diagnosed students. And it used to be like dark-skinned students in the 1950s. It's the exact same thing. It's this theory of segregated schools on the basis of some sort of like marginalized class definition.
Right.
The diagnosis they were using, which I must comment, they never received an official clinical opinion even existed. It all came from the school, is no longer recognized in the DSM. So it's not like
no
actual
shit.
science they're basing this off of. They are trying to say anything they can think of to provoke this system to indefinitely hold me in its custody.
Right. And you know what? You're not the only one. You know this. So many kids, they have ADHD or let's say Ritalin, get them on Ritalin. It's like,
right.
Maybe because they're not interested in the fucking school subject.
Right.
Their mind's in a different place. You know what I mean?
Right. Or they're trying to diagnose non-compliance. They even did that with me at sports, where when they started asking me the questions and I just wouldn't answer the questions, or I'd say, I do not understand.
Right.
Ordered a mental health evaluation because it's like, no, I will not contract with the public. There's no such thing contract with the public. And then they said, you're going to Zulu, quote unquote, or like the hospital. Or
right.
The like mental competency evaluations. But the stuff which actually made the most sense to me as a human being was the stuff that this Moorish individual was explaining to me. I know now, and like it was like your video, which kind of introduced me to the topic. I also got the writings of Roger Elvick while I was at the GCSO facilities, and the writings of Gene Keating, who I think was actually one of the successors of Roger Elvick. I think Gene Keating, in my minds, are kind of like this. I'm doing a cross symbol with my fingers in terms of like how we analyze like what that system is. It's like my image of what it is perfectly aligns with Keating's in terms of this is gigantic, trying to sort of lean against the body of the person as a way of holding them in custody. And they think that's the law when actually, if you look at the Vienna Convention Treaty, the Hague Convention Treaty, all these other things, they never have jurisdiction over the natural person. They've created this imaginary incarcerated person, which they're saying is you, and that's the genocide, when really that's not you. The real you is a diplomat with immunity under the Vienna Convention Treaty of 1961 and a statutory procedure for the dismissal of any civil or criminal court case against you under 22 U.S.C. 254D for lack of personal jurisdiction. You're the diplomat. They've misidentified who they are trying to hold in their custody.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly. And I do like the way of Gene Keating's teachings as far as the emboss, the fingerprints, basically stating that here, this fingerprint is this entity, this fingerprint is that entity, and that fingerprint, you are letting them know, the IRS, hey, I know I am separating these entities from trustee, to beneficiary, and so forth. I am separating these entities. I know that there are separations here for these specific identities compared to these employee identification, of the person and all that stuff. So when you let them know that, they're like, oh shit, okay, they know the difference. You see what I mean? It's awesome. It's an awesome thing, because we are diplomats. We are also American indigenous if you are from the United States, but really you're an indigenous of the land in any fucking country. It doesn't matter. You are indigenous of the land. You are not a fucking walking corporation in the world. So yeah, I totally understand that part. I mean, it's really, when we start to realize the difference, it changes everything.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of the fictitious jurisdiction of their environment that's running through the bodies of like 99% of this planet's population, when they're seeing it's a good idea of going to those schools and looking for jobs in order to get money, they think that's a good idea. This is outside of that jurisdiction. So
right.
they have, and there is federal case law on the dismissal of prosecutions on these grounds. It's United States v. Cobregate. We've got the opinion in order from that case in my district Discord server. There is a statutory procedure for the dismissal of all civil and criminal court proceedings ever implemented against somebody for lack of personal jurisdiction. And that can be invoked at any time, but the court appointed attorneys are not going to invoke that set of rights, because they're operating under stagnation and also a presumed claim of jurisdiction, which is actually a misrepresentation of the law. Under such circumstances, it doesn't ever have all the elements of jurisdiction. You ask them for the bar card, you ask them for the oath, the constitutional oath of office, you ask them for copies of their bonds and license and registration. They will never have these documents which show that they're actually even a licensed court. So it's essentially this presumed claim of jurisdiction and people wearing hats with a background in law enforcement training at the academy. That's all the whole court system really is. And any action can be challenged for lack of jurisdiction at any time, even if it was retroactive, even if it's a prior court case or an upcoming court case. That remedy always exists to reconcile the genocide that is created when this false personation is created by the public participants or those who are operating under the public control, or like the DTTC lien, and then that's controlling all their behavior, including the pursuit of money and all of those things. It's like there's a jurisdictional immunity release switch, and that was what made the most sense to me for the situation, because the most traumatic part of this, just when it eventually got to the Gwinnett courts, was being stranded in public, because you're constantly surrounded by people and an environment that makes absolutely no sense. And there is no clock which has been set amounting to a legal mechanism for release from confinement. So the aggravators of that environment are compounded by the fact that I'm essentially going into this with the mind of a teenager. I was a teenager when all of this happened. And now I'm having to essentially teach myself things like criminal trial practice and trying to make some sense of the situation or figuring out how to function in the situation. And eventually, based on my proactive efforts, we were successfully able to get an administrative dismissal, which is where a prosecutor says, hey, I have nothing to contradict anything they're saying, so we're going to issue a state's motion for null pros, which is a dismissal of the warrant document that had been filed by the school staff. So I essentially was able to leave, which was around February of 2021. But this honestly makes me regret ever going to school to attend. And if I had my way, I would have spent the first 18 years of my life at home on the internet, playing video games and learning business and money and finance and credit structuring and credit care and optimization and all of that stuff, which gives somebody the discretion and ability to function independently.
So let me ask you this question really quick, David. So how did you come across learning about the DTCC and getting this white card, because I know that a lot of people, I've heard about it from so many people. Oh, I know this person that has this, and I know this person that has the black card and all this stuff. And, you know, I've always heard about other people who, whatever, but I've noticed that you have actually you've actually went through a major leap in your knowledge, and just want the listeners to understand how did you do this?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm fully transparent with all of it.
Okay.
So most of my own research in this area comes from Gene Keating's files, specifically his bonds treatise and his explanation of IRS Form 1099 OID, which, as he has explained, is the central piece to the entire sovereign ideology. In theory, when any of these public actors are coming at somebody and trying to launch an external expectation towards them, they're operating in the capacity of a nominee as defined in Internal Revenue Publication 1212. So when you file the 1099 OID with them, they become obligated to file a corresponding 1099 OID at the IRS, and also pay the amounts which you identify on yours as the originating credit over to the Treasury, which is the IRS, which then corresponds with the accounts payable for the SSN when that entity is created by the birth certificate, which you would then be entitled to claim on. Technically, it's supposed to be an estate return. I recently actually did 1040 because I have the audacity to file it on a 1040. When that happens, what the Treasury will do, like if you list the wire instructions for the Treasury Direct account, like the routing and account number, when you set up your own Treasury Direct account, just use that account number and then the Treasury's routing number. They will wire the OID credits right into a 0% certificate of indebtedness, which is held in the Treasury Direct account as a security, because we never even touch the FRNs, it's just a security. And it has value. It can be traded. It can produce interest dividend revenue, which can either be reinvested. In my case, what I did and how I got the white card was I had that security. I was having it like brokered by Merrill Lynch, which is like conventional brokerage. And then when I had the brokerage account opened, they issued me the white card, which is the CMA access card. And it's in the picture that I sent over via email.
Yeah.
And that, it's like the equivalent of a line of margin or conventional credit card that anybody could use, like when you're just out and about in public using a conventional credit card to buy things like everyday living expenses. And it'll settle against the security positions in the accounts. They essentially will just manage all of that for you. But that is how the entire process is correctly done.
That makes perfect fucking sense. You finally got it, because I'll tell you, David, the other people were doing it completely wrong. There was a guy and he was like, oh, no, they'll send the FRNs right into your bank account. And what FRNs? Wait a second here. Floating rate notes, no. And I know that you knew that you had something, because when you spoke about the Treasury Direct, that makes perfect sense, because it's complete credit. It has nothing to do with the floating rate notes. Right?
Yep.
Okay.
It's
good.
It's
safe.
Securities. And it's safe.
Yay! That's all I wanted to hear. Someone that can do something for real that is safe and not putting my students in danger. And that's why I had to put a stop to the other guy I was talking to years ago. I said, something is fucking wrong. I didn't have a Treasury Direct back then, but I was like, I knew something was freaking off. It was my intuition. And I'm like, and then I find out later on that the Treasury Direct is really the way to go, because you are utilizing your own credit as collateral, right? Certain collaterals within that, the trust, you would connect your foreign trust to the Treasury Direct account. Correct?
Bingo. That is
okay.
That's the ideal way of doing it. I recently,
beautiful.
I personally recently did it the more risky way, where I just said, okay, I'm putting this right on the estate, because the SSNs, they identify estates. We're foreign diplomats. I'm not afraid to just put this on the SSN. And when I did that, I recently, like when I filed the 1099 OID, I got confirmation on irs.gov that it had been processed by the Treasury, and it showed up as a credit under that.
Wow. That's brilliant.
So that's how you know when you have done the process correctly. If you log in on
Yay!
with all their like online accounts, it's a full portal. They can give you tax transcripts for any TIN number or EIN number that you are in control of. And when they show you the tax transcripts on there, as soon as it shows a 1099 OID credit is reflected on this account and is acknowledged by the Treasury as like due for refunds, now it's recognized and can essentially be credited into the TDA by sending proper wire instructions on the tax return for that entity. Like if you're using the 98 trust, you'd file a 1041. If you have a corporation that's owned by the 98 trust, you'd send an 1120. If you had audacity and did it on an estate, you can use a 1040. But that is the proper filing structure and proper order of operations as a way of reclaiming all of this credit that the whole entity and public corporations like took control of through the birth certificate bond and then tried to charge you twice for through most conventional purchases and theories of working for money.
Exactly. And so I was going to have you explain more about what is the DTCC and the DTC card and the limit that it has on it.
Yes, the card
as far as purchasing power goes.
Yes. So when you do this and you break what we call the withdrawable limits at conventional banks, it's like an unlimited credit card, like American Express credit cards. Those, they don't have a purchase limit. They can just make a whole bunch of purchases, and then later the balance is settled off of the card through the servicer. Like with the Amex cards, they want like FRNs for it. If you have one of these, the brokerages will actually take security positions as the equivalent of payment on the actual like CMA card that they'll issue. It's just a cash management access card was what I had sent over like in the email when we were discussing this.
Interesting. So it's limitless credit basically. And you can just write it off on 1099 OID and do exactly what you were saying earlier with a Treasury Direct account.
Yes.
Awesome. No discharges involved, correct?
Correct.
Wow. So that's exactly what people needed to know, you know, because I get a lot, you know, clients that are like, they want to sign up with me and they're like, I don't know, I'm kind of scared, and you know, I'm afraid is the FBI going to come after me, and you know what I mean? Moving forward with these processes, what do you say to that, to the people that are just you know, kind of scared to move forward and all of that?
Unless another person on this planet knows your face, has seen you do a crime in their presence, and wants you incarcerated for that act, you're not usually going to be at risk of being placed into custody by a law enforcement agency. That's what I would have to say about that.
Right. So nothing about money laundering or any of that.
No. And if this is all done on the EIN of the foreign trust, IRS doesn't even get a name and an address to prosecute or run an application for an arrest warrant.
Right. Because it's completely legitimate what you're doing. You're not dealing with what their notes are, which are the Federal Reserve notes or floating rate notes. And those are the notes that they tax people on.
Yes.
And when you're, oh, go ahead.
You're dealing with securities and security positions like 0% certificates of indebtedness, treasury bonds, tips and notes, and just conventional like bonds and investments and ownership interests in those investments that are regularly bought, sold, and traded by anybody who has and readily uses a Treasury Direct account.
Yeah, because I was hearing some stuff. I'm sure you've heard of her, Path to Finder.
Oh, Tamika?
Yeah. What do you think about her and compared to your what you have?
I think she is on the right track.
Path to Freedom, sorry. Path to Freedom, not Path to Finder, like Pathfinder of a Nissan. Sorry. Okay, go on.
Yeah, I think she is on the right track. I just think in terms of how she is trying to transact, there are maybe a few missing pieces, but I think she is on the right track in terms of like because I watched her video. She's getting most of the same information that I'm describing here, where there's like a CUSIP number attached to a bond. That bond is evidence of the originating credit, which we produced as living persons. And then it is possible for ownership of that security to actually be transferred at the higher level, which can be done either through the filing of the tax forms. And then what she is suggesting is like sending wire instructions over to the indenture trustees at the
Yes.
that hold those securities, is what she is suggesting. I think that can also work as an avenue. But this method that I'm explaining now is something that I recently had direct results with, like where
yeah. I was hearing real quick about that, the indenture thing. I was hearing the same thing, but many people were not having success with it. But anyway, go back to what you're saying.
Yeah, with the recent result that I had, everything was done through e-filing. So it was like,
Wow.
Yes, it was like electronically filed 1099 OID and then an electronically filed return 1040 series through TurboTax. And it all, like when the 1099 posted electronically filing, I was like, yes, I've been trying to get those posted on there and recognized by the Treasury since like 2021. And I kept filing like the paper returns in the mail. And every single time the IRS would just lose the documents. And then they say, oh, documents, so we think it's frivolous. But as soon as everything went through electronically, it posted on irs.gov.
Oh my God. That is so awesome. That is such great news, David. I'm so happy to hear that. Wow. You might as well just do the e-filing. It's a lot quicker and faster and gets to the point, right? And then you have actual evidence of it. When you're actually seeing it with your own eyes, you're like, holy shit, it's credited. It's happening. It's really real what's going on. That's beautiful.
Awesome. Can be done anywhere with an internet connection and a smartphone or a laptop.
Oh, wow. That is brilliant. Just first you got to do little hurdles to get shit set up. But after that, everything, hey, e-file, not a problem.
Exactly.
Oh, that's beautiful. You know what? That's what I think that the 5D is going to. The 5D vibration, the energy, the dimensions that people are talking about. They talk about, oh, we're going to move into like a utopia one day or whatever because we're moving out of the 3D. And a 3D is that control system, based on the 3D system, control government, control your money, control this other bullshit. And because of the awareness, people are moving into this a higher awareness. And they're like, hey, wait a second, this is how money is. All right, through a signature, through this, we're able to create this ourselves. Because I've heard a lot of things about a UCC3, being able to create your own money or currency utilizing the UCC3. I've heard a lot about that as well. But again, it's all about sending it over to the IRS, sending it via mail and all that stuff. But now you're actually seeing things happening where you're actually creating that currency.
Yeah,
right?
It's all through touch of a button. It's just art. Like I hang out with graphic artists all day. This is just line art. It's like you want to do a UCC, it's an e-file. You want a 1099, it can be e-filed. You want like a 1041 or 1040, it can all be e-filed, and it's all just generated on computers, and it has the force of law. We even in my circle, we also do like a lot of litigation in the inner circle on Discord. All the courts have e-filing, so it's possible to create an account on like Georgia judicial e-filer.gov or whatever, and now you have all of the same like filing powers and rights as like a practicing attorney, and from a laptop can create like motions, court documents, proposed orders, and just anything that would be needed in order to essentially like correct court issues. And it's all just done through electronic filing. And I was going somewhere with that, but like we've created documents where we actually, in some of the situations on the Discord server with their litigation issues, we've actually gotten onto like live Zoom court hearings, like with a judge and like an opposing counsel. And we've actually won those via Zoom. And it's just so insanely profound to me that everything that happened at the Gwinnett Superior Court and the schools could have been disposed of immediately through a 15-minute Zoom court hearing. But they wanted to involve war machines, such as an abandoned computer theory of incarceration, and actively attended public schools where the amount of emotional abuse is worse, when anybody can control all of these organizations and entities through the touch of a button on any device that has like an internet connection, such as a smartphone or a laptop.
Right.
And it's like, that's profound to me from the standpoint of like my generation, because most of us were just a bunch of kids in our like teens and 20s with laptops, with like original content and like YouTube and DeviantArt and Twitter and stuff like that. But it's like with this is art. Like these legal,
Right.
when it shows up as like a credit on the account on irs.gov, that is pure art right there.
Yeah, I would think so.
Recognized by a whole entity as valid.
That's beautiful. So, okay. So basically what you have is basically, I was going to ask you, in order to help people further along on their journey, after they get their trust set up and all that stuff, they would go to you. And you said you had a membership?
Yes, I run
Okay.
I run a Discord server for all SPC law related matters and any sort of situation where like this area of remedies might apply. There's also a Patreon page, which right now I have like levels of donations essentially for membership, where there's bronze level, silver level, gold level, platinum level. It's like $5, $10, $15, $25, and then like separate coaching behind that through premium chats, where if they want to get on one-on-one, we can go like by the hour, forensic accounting matters and things like that. And it's all available. I use the Discord server primarily to speak with clients, but it's all available just on those platforms.
Okay.
And
awesome. Yeah, because
go ahead.
Oh, yeah, because I'm getting a lot of people, because for me to do another webinar, for me to do one, because they've been asking and finally I'm like, well, I can do one in November, based on the information you've been sharing, because a lot of the people that are wanting to move forward, they're like, oh crap, I need to get shit set up, and then after that, what I do is I just send them over to your email, my students over to your email address, and then you could just tell them where to go.
Yeah, I get a lot of those, and then I
pretty
just
much
the link to the Discord.
Yeah, as long as you are in alignment with them, it's cool. No troublemakers. But yeah, because a lot of people were asking, well, how much does he charge? And I said, well, I don't really know. I know he does the membership stuff and on Discord. So I'm glad you brought that up. And then I can just put that out there for those that are wanting to move forward with my workshop webinar thing. And then that's pretty much it. But I just wanted to connect with you just to find out how you were doing it. It doesn't have to be all technical, but the way that you're doing it is very much, it's a very safe way of doing it. None of the students are going to get into trouble. Like the other group that I was working with years ago, where the guy named JC/Max/Stellar Viceroy, he calls himself so many names, and it's ridiculous. And saying that, oh, no worries. You just, fill in a 1041 or one of these coupons, and they're going to the IRS is going to send you $3 million into your bank account. But don't worry, I had some students that had their houses taken from them and had their, all their assets taken from them, but it's okay. You could just keep paying them this way. And I'm like, are you fucking insane? You would actually put your students through that shit? Really? So that's why I'm so glad what I'm hearing from you is extremely legitimate. And it is very, very safe, because like you said, it is dealing with securities. It's not dealing with these Federal Reserve notes and the Federal Reserve notes in your bank account. This is a different account. Correct?
Yes. It's like it's like a Treasury Direct account, or if you want a conventional brokerage, use a conventional brokerage, anything that just holds bonds and securities and conventional like treasury, everyday treasury products. So it's like security positions, and there's no need to use FRNs. The brokerage will issue basically something called a line of margin or a CMA card, and that's like a credit card, like when out in the public just making purchases on credit cards, but they settle the balance out of the securities themselves. So
right.
there's no exchange of actual FRNs. It's just all on credit cards.
Good. That's all I wanted to hear, David. I feel so relieved. So relieved. And now I can actually share this with my students, and they would feel so relieved as well. Because I know they have been probably extremely duped by so many shady assholes out there. You know, like for this information, they would sell. I remember 2010 when I was hearing about the black card and all that. And I also heard of the black card, you have to pay that shit back anyway. It's not like the DTTC card, it's completely different. And people would just go ahead when they started finding out, ooh, the black card, yeah, let's go ahead and sell it. And they would sell it for 20 grand, 50 grand, you know, all this stuff. And then they would just bullshit people, you know. I've been around the block since then. I've seen it happen, and it was like, wow. But I knew, and I was saying in another podcast, it's really funny, David. I told the universe when I was learning about all this on the secure credit route, and basically it was to, you know, put a stop to my ex-husband, put a stop to child support. When I had all this information come to me about the black card and the circular forms and all of that, I said, it's just too much information. TMI, I'm not ready for this. You know, find someone, universe, find someone who is ready, who has the information, the correct information, the safe information, and bring that person to me. And I knew it would take years. I knew it would either take years or it would never happen. And it is the truth. I put that out there because I always, you know, have a connection with my higher self. If it's meant to be, because it felt like I was becoming so obsessed with it. I didn't have all the information in place, and it was like trying to win the fucking lottery, really. Okay. With not having all the foundation information or any of that. And so I just let it go. I mean, this is back in the day of Angela Stark, you know, was talking to Patrick Devine. I used to get on that show, and she knew who I was, and she told everyone, oh, so cool, Joanna's on here now. And, you know, I was really well known in those circles back then. But then I was like, you know what, and when the time comes, and if I'm ready for the information, then cool, I'll be ready. But I am not ready right now. So I let that shit go. I let it go, and it relieved me from spending hundreds of thousands of fucking dollars on a bunch of bullshit. But I'm really grateful now. And then here you come to me 14 years later, and you're like, hey, I got the secret recipe.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It happens. It takes time. It's not always overnight. When you trust in the universe, everything will just work out. You know, they give you signs along the way, and you know what I'm talking about. So I'm just very grateful to have you on the show tonight. And anything else you'd like to share before I wrap this up?
I like where what we're developing is headed. Say that. A lot of this, it comes from the mental visions that I had from the inside of those facilities. And while the situation was going on, all my anger and just drive of fighting off the force that was acting against me. So I scoured the universe a good bit to piece all of this stuff together so that it actually works.
Right. That's the way to go. And you did a great job so far. You're actually seeing success happen, and that's all that matters. You know, who gives a fuck about the philosophy? It's like, does it work or not? But yeah, philosophy is important. I get it, but you know, like Winston Strout, he can philosophize all he wants, but a lot of his shit wasn't working at all. You see, and you got a lot of your information to the point. You know.
Yeah, that's part of the way I talk. It's just straight to the point. It's like, here's what it is.
Yeah, that's how I am too. I'm like, here it is, boom, 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 boom. But you know, at least get a foundation and a background so you understand where you're coming from or where we're coming from. But yeah, this is it. Boom, 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 boom. Let's get to the fucking point already. You know, I totally understand that. All right, thank you so much, David. I really, really so grateful for you to show up tonight, and I look forward to other episodes with you as well, and other updates on what you're doing with the inner circle, and we'll talk again. So take